Hi, this is Laura Holyoke, and I have your cultural lens overview for you. Something that I often think of, and somebody said this, but I can't remember who, but culture to an organization is what personality is to an individual. And if you try to think about how hard it may be to change your personality, you may also get an idea of how hard it may be to change culture in an organization. So seeing culture is culture in organizations is a lot like culture in our families, although we usually don't think of our families as having culture. So things in families, if you how birthdays are handled in families, maybe how different holidays are handled, that is our culture coming out, and having certain nights that we play things, how we have friends over, how we're taught to set the table, how we eat dinner together or not. That is all culture in our family. And it's also when we grow up in a family, which we've all hopefully done, it's the idea that when we get to know other people outside of our family, maybe a significant other, that their family is really weird because they don't do anything like our family did. Our family is normal, and that is the culture in our family because we don't see it anymore. We've never been taught that anything is different. So culture endures like a personality, where organizational climate is likened to a brief mood. A culture is made up of norms that govern the behavior of members in an organization. And norms are a bit like rules, only much less explicit. Norms are very implicit. So a short story that's not a real story, but that explains culture, is you take a cage and put 5 apes in the cage. In the middle of the cage, you have a ladder and a bunch of bananas at the top of the ladder. So all the apes go for the ladder and the bananas, and you spray them all with ice cold water. So they all stop, and they go for the ladder and bananas again at some time later, and you spray them all with ice cold water again. They don't like being sprayed with ice cold water. However, in the meantime, you turn off the ice cold water. None of those 5 apes ever goes for the ladder and bananas. You take one of the original 5 apes and replace it with a new ape. That new ape sees the ladder and bananas and heads to the ladder to get to the bananas and is beaten by all the other 4 apes, has no idea why, tries it again, gets beaten by the other 4 apes, again, has no idea why. They don't get sprayed with the cold water because it's turned off. Take another one of the original apes and replace it with a new ape. That new ape again sees the ladder and bananas, goes for the ladder and bananas, and all the other apes beat this ape to keep it from getting to the ladder and bananas. Now, the first replaced ape takes part in the beating and has no idea why he's doing it. And this is what culture is in an organization, that's the way we do things around here. That new ape, and if you replace all of the original apes with new apes, none of them ever go for the ladder and bananas again, because that's the way we do things around here. Just kind of a fun culture story. So culture tends to influence what skills we acquire and what we think about those skills, or what we think about in an organization. Culture influences how we acquire the information and skills, how it's done in that organization. Culture influences who is allowed to participate in activities within an organization. Culture also influences when we are allowed to participate in certain activities. It's socially constructed. So culture reflects meanings that are constituted in interaction and that form commonly accepted definitions of the situation. What may be a funny dinner table situation or happening in one family may be awful in the next family. Birthdays may be treated one way and everybody has to sing in one family, in one culture, and the next family nobody sings. So it's socially constructed. Culture also defines us in our families and in our organizations, what we pay attention to. That is what's important to pay attention to, what actions to take and when to take those actions, what things mean, what they really mean once you really get to know that culture, and how to react emotionally. I don't know if you can read the caption on the cartoon in the lower right hand corner. One guy says to the other, "I don't know how it started either. All I know is that it's part of our corporate culture." They have ridiculous looking hats on. So organizational culture starts with leadership, is reinforced with the accumulated learning of the organizational members, and is powerful, albeit often implicit, set of forces that determine human behavior. Culture goes deeper than the words used in the mission statement, way deeper, and sometimes they don't always represent the mission statement. Organizational culture is the web of tacit understandings, boundaries, common language, and shared expectations maintained over time by the members of the organization, whether they understand why they do something or not. So if you can understand the culture, you can understand an organization. If you can understand somebody's personality, you can understand that person. Culture tends to explain the incomprehensible and the irrational behavior carried out by its members. Organization with history has culture. And culture is a phenomenon that surrounds all of us all the time. We take part in different cultures in terms of friends that we built, in our relationships, in our families of origin, in our workplaces. Culture is the accumulated shared learning from shared history, whether we've shared in all of it or not. Culture implies structural stability and patterning and integration. Now, note that structural stability may or may not be healthy. The patterning may or may not be healthy. And to know that not every group develops a culture, that groups oftentimes are not together long enough to develop a culture, or don't have any real established culture over time. Some concepts about culture, that culture is behavior, it is learned, and it is learned through our interactions with others that belong to that culture. And a saying that I believe Edgar Schein said is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have, and I think there's a saying out there also that culture eats strategy for lunch. But it's the idea that you can have the best business strategy going. However, if it does not align with your culture, or your culture is not healthy in alignment, then you can have the best strategy and it just won't matter. So Edgar Schein, I believe this is covered in your book as in terms of the 3 levels of culture. Schein identifies, and Schein really is the father of organizational culture. The first level are artifacts, and artifacts are tangible and observable aspects that we see in organizations. This is how people dress, how people treat one another, physical layout, our behavioral rituals as we go into an organization, as we live in an organization, in our families. They're easy to see. Artifacts are always easy to see. However, they're hard to decipher the meaning. So if you happened to be in my building and you saw somebody walk out of my office and they said, "Thank you so much, Dr. Holyoke," and turned and left, that was pretty easy to see. However, you don't know, if you don't know me, you won't know if I require everybody to call me Dr. Holyoke. You don't know if that were maybe a joke, or if it had to do with that person and the time of day or whenever that person visits me. So again, it's hard to decipher, real easy to see. Espouse values is the next level, and these are beliefs about what should happen in an organization. Espouse is what we say we do, and so espoused values are also, they are strategies, they're goals, they're philosophies that we say that we use, and they're espoused justifications, so beliefs about what we think that we that needs to happen and justifying why. Espoused values may or may not be what are actually carried out in organizations. It can be because espoused values may not be the values that are actually in use. I'll give you a couple of examples coming up. And then finally, the deepest level of culture is our basic assumptions. These are taken for granted ways of doing and thinking and achieving goals. They're unconscious and beliefs, their perceptions, their thoughts and feelings. These are the ultimate source of all of our values in action and actions in organizations. And usually we want to understand the basic assumptions when we join an organization or join somebody else's family. However, and they're also what kind of tends to slap us in the face because they're so different from what we know. However, once we've been in an organization anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half, they become our own taken for granted ways of doing and thinking and achieving goals in that organization. We no longer see them as different because they're ingrained in us now. Hard to ferret out what basic assumptions are. So if you think of culture like an iceberg, above the waterline are artifacts, the language, norms, formal roles. The artifacts are things, authority structures and symbols, everything that people can see, yet may not be able to decipher. Values are the informal roles. Some of the subcultures carry out values. Some rituals and ceremonies are also values. The stratification systems, the myths that are told, the socialization processes, and the values themselves, so espoused values. And then below the waterline are the basic assumptions, and they're based on beliefs of the founders that have been carried out, not passed along maybe, the history that gets forgotten over time, the worldview of the organization, again based on usually founding members, and then the assumptions of how and why people carry out certain behaviors. So I'm jumping on onto real quickly a different perspective on culture, and I don't believe this is included in your book, but Joanne Martin wrote about perspectives on culture, and her 3 perspectives that she talked about are integration, differentiation, and fragmentation. She says that in organizations you can identify by one of these 3. So the integration perspective is when organizational culture is consistently reinforced across the organization, that everybody buys into it, it's common, and it is shared. The next one is the differentiation perspective. It recognizes inconsistencies and the lack of consensus across the organization. So it doesn't mean that there's an absence of culture. It's simply that you'll probably experience one cultural form among many that are in that organization. So this may generate competing visions, loyalties, or subcultures within an organization. However, Martin says that fragmentation is the most common scenario, that there's confusion and ambiguity over an organization's core values and essential premises. So this is the inability to really articulate a coherent vision and consensus over the values and goals. What are they? And it may be due to the contradictions and paradoxes of organizational life that permit a variety of legitimate visions and courses of action. If there's been quite a few changeovers of leadership, if people haven't been able to settle into some way of performing, all of these can end up with fragmentation. So I'm going to end this part of culture now, and then thank you for listening to this, and then I will conclude an overview of culture in a next PowerPoint.